Hello, everyone, and welcome to our data automation webinar. My name is Frank Ziemba. I'm a senior consultant and trainer at Spider Strategies. Here's a picture of me along with my email address. Also shown is our education email, which is learn@spiderstrategies.com. Feel free to reach out to us if you need some additional info or help. Quickly, just a couple webinar logistics. First, this webinar is being recorded and will eventually be posted on our Spider Strategies Learn page. All attendees are currently muted and will remain so throughout the entire session. However, if you have any questions during the session, you can post them here and we'll either respond during the session or after. Next, I'd like to quickly cover our agenda. We'll be showing importing tips and tricks. We'll be reviewing importing a scorecard structure, measure values, and initiative status updates. And to help with that, we'll be leveraging Connect and an option called Measure Updates. And we'll close with an example on connecting to a database and importing data from there. With that, let's jump right into QuickScore. With my apologies to our Scoreboard customers. Please note that the displays will look a little different from what you're used to, but most of the functionality is going to be exactly the same. Okay, so in QuickScore here, I've already selected a particular organizational structure called Manual Org Example. And I've spelled that out purposely just to illustrate building up a scorecard manually. And I'm going to quickly do that. So I'll walk you through just how you walk through building up a scorecard from scratch. You do need to click an option called Create Scorecard, give it a desired name. I'm just going to call it Generic Scorecard and click Create. And I'm going to rifle through these here. So the next step is going to be create a new perspective. I'll create something called Financial, make sure the type is valid, and click Create. Okay, so our product defaults to looking to create things of like nature. So I've just created a perspective. It's assuming that I have a second perspective that I wish to create, which certainly could be valid. In this case, I'm going to keep things as simple as I can by just creating one perspective. And I'll click back on the financial. The auto-generated structure goes away. Then if I want to create a new item up at the top there, I'll select New Scorecard Item. And then what I'll do is introduce an objective. In this case, I'll call this increase revenue. And I'll click create. Same idea here. If I've got it assumes the product wants me to create a second objective. If I don't want to do that, click on the item I just created, and then I'll click new scorecard item one more time to create the lowest level, which is measure. Okay, so I'm going to provide a name of training revenue. And this time we'll just stop for a second and just take a look at all the various fields that are out here. And these are going to come into play in a minute when we're talking about importing. And you'll see that the product defaults to a number of defaulting settings here. Things like the scoring type being set to goal red flag. And I'll just draw your attention to calendar being set to monthly as well. All of that is changeable. And for now, I'm just going to accept that as is and click create. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to assume I'm done with my very simplistic structure. To get out of this mode, I'm going to click done in the bottom left here. Now, that only took me a minute to build up that structure, that very simplistic structure. But let's say I had a massive one to develop. Would that have been the smartest approach for me to go down? And my answer probably would be no. There is an option where I can leveraging an import, and I'll walk you through how you go about that right now. Okay, so I could go directly to Excel at this point if I was a genius on all the little columns and fields that the product is looking for. But much smarter approach as far as handling this is just go to the structure. If you've got one already in place like I've got, which is actually a nice helping hand for this next step for me, what I can do is click on any level, and it doesn't matter which one I select there. Up in the top right, there's an option called Send To. And if I click on that, you'll see there's a number of options. And we're going to be working with, in today's session, these last two. Now, the first thing that we're working on is the buildup of a scorecard import. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. what you'll see now is down in the bottom left, that has been successfully exported. And I'm going to go ahead and open that up. Okay, now within here, the zoom is typically not the greatest to start with. So to increase this, I don't want to get too carried away with it, but I'll just bump that up a bit. I'll expand these columns a little bit, or maybe even fit up the entire screen here. Just show that out a little bit more there. Okay, so typically the next thing that I do is expand all columns. I like having a full visual of what I'm working with without things getting truncated there. And what we'll start with is, as we take a look at this, is a number of important things here. Is one, how far does this spreadsheet extend to? And you'll notice that if I go back up to the top there, you'll see that this spreadsheet is extending through column W. All right, so you see at column X, there's nothing there. So there's a number of columns that are part of this spreadsheet. As we work our way to measure updates, you're going to see this spreadsheet that we're working with get cut in half. So this one's got the most work that we're going to need to be dealing with here. Now, a couple things with this to notice is that what I've dumped out has been brought across. You'll notice that there is an entry on subsequent rows with an indentation here. So the scorecard level is in A2, the perspective level is down in B3, the objective down in C4, and so on there. And that's an important step to understand how this works here. I'm not going to get into all these columns individually at this point in time. I'll just focus in on a column called description, for instance here. The reason that we have these spaced as you see it here in the hierarchical order is that this column description is a one-to-one mapping, okay? So within here, I can either have a description on row 2, a description for the scorecard. In row 3, I might have a description for the perspective, and so on. So the way that this is spaced out is important, meaning not having all these cells automatically brought up into row 2. So that's an important first thing to understand there. Now, the other thing to note is that there are values. If you've got something built up, take a look at the measure level where I've got 5 values brought across here that have automatically come across even though I didn't take the time to select anything manually. And I made the point earlier when I built it up manually to say that there are defaulting values and those things are going to come across here and I might be perfectly content with what I'm seeing on screen here. Okay, so we'll just leave things as is there. And now we're going to start building this up as we start working through this. Okay, so the first change I'm going to make is to the organization column. So I started working with this structure and I left this purposefully up in the top left so you can see what we were working with before. I had a structure called manual org example. Well, we used that to build it up, and now we're going to be working throughout the remainder of this session with a second org called automated org example. So I'm just going to change that up slightly there. And I'm going to change all the contents in that column to match that value. Now, an really important thing to note is that the automated org example does not contain a scorecard defined at all yet in the system. So let me go back there and show you how that looks currently. So if I switch over here under my structure, I'm going to click on automated org example. And you're going to see that this looks exactly the way the manual org example looked before I clicked create scorecard. Okay, got nothing in there. And that's a really important step that I'll stress again in a few minutes when we get into Connect. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go back to Excel here. And now I'm going to manipulate my changes that I want to bring in. So the first thing that I might want to bring across is a second measure underneath the increased revenue objective. And to do that, I'm just going to quickly do a copy and paste and drop that into row 6. Now with this, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make one change. I'm going to say that this new measure that I'm creating is going to be called book revenue. Magically here, everything else is going to be exactly what I need for book revenue. The scoring type is great. The calendar being monthly is great. So I'm going to leave everything else that I see there alone. So nice quick way to just introduce a second measure. If I have a third one, great, I could just drop those in. But for the sake of time, I'm going to leave it at that. Now, what if I want to introduce another perspective? So in this case, what I want to do, I'm going to work my way up to row 3, copy all those cells, drop that starting into row 7. And you'll see now I've got a duplicate section going on for financial here. Now, this one what I'm gonna work through is a number of different changes. So I'm gonna need to make sure I get the perspective correct. So my new perspective is going to be customer. Do I need to change the objective? Probably. So this one's going to be called improve customer satisfaction. Again, I like expanding columns as I go. This way I can get a full feel for what's going on, make sure I don't have any typos along the way there. So I've got my objective cleaned up, and I'm going to change my first measure that we see here from training revenue to customer satisfaction survey. And unfortunately, I'm picking measures with really, really long names. Forgive me as I type. Okay, so I've got that hopefully typed in correctly there. Now, I'm going to do a couple more changes here. So if we pick on customer satisfaction survey, so we're going to highlight this row here. The question now is, when I did the copy from financial, how are all these individual settings coming across? Are they good? We're going to say, no, in this case, the customer satisfaction survey, we're dealing with percentages. My satisfaction percent was 95%, 100%, that type of an idea. So under data type, now all this is in my head right now, just knowing what the product is looking for. I understand that there might be some time to work through what these values are, but for now, for the sake of time, we're just going to accept the fact that I know that the product is looking for, to represent percent, a word called percentage. Okay, so I'm going to go to the appropriate column and make that adjustment here. The other thing I'm going to do, just to show you another change here, is that you'll see our default is to sum up values. And maybe for percentages, well, that's probably not a good thing to do. So another change I'm going to make is the aggregation type. I'm going to make that a switch to average. Now, an important thing to note is that everything that I'm typing in here is critical. Make sure I don't have any typos. If I put an extra value in here or miss an E before the N, the product is not going to understand what I'm bringing across. So with these entries here, to have that come across successfully, I've got to be very careful with my typing, okay? So that looks good to me at this point, and we'll move on to the last row here. Actually, before we do that, I just want to introduce another topic here. So let me highlight customer satisfaction survey. And let's go back to the fact that we've got these columns at the end. There's 7 of them for threshold. And for this one, what we're working with is goal and red flag. If you're familiar with that, goal and red flag means that we've got 2 threshold values that are out there. Now what's not immediately intuitive is that the first threshold column, which is threshold column Q here, is going to be, in this case, our red flag value. So I'm going to drop in the lowest value, which in this case, I'm just going to make 90. And then the next column over is going to be my goal, which is going to be 95. Okay, so I'm going to bring across those values. What is the point of these entries here? If I bring these across, these are going to be defaulting threshold values for the customer satisfaction survey measure month by month. Okay, so that's what we're entering at that point in time there. Now, again, I've made note of these 7 threshold columns, and you'll notice for this particular measure, because I'm working with goal and red flag, I only need to take the time to populate 2. Now, I'm purposely going to work with the one measure that we've got in our system. So we've got 11 scoring types. There's one that's called 3-color stabilize that I'm going to introduce. I'm going to purposely just call that the measure name as well, so it stands out a bit. This obviously would be something more meaningful than 3-color stabilize in this column D. Now in column G, what I'm going to do is a copy and paste of that value. And this is where I've got to make sure in the scoring type column that this is exactly what the product is looking for. So the spacing is correct, the labeling is correct, meaning the number 3, and that looks valid to what I'm expecting the product to be looking for at this point. Okay, so I'm going to make those changes. This, of course, would have been a better name there at the beginning, but I'll leave that alone for now. The last thing I want to do with this is I'm going to introduce just differing values for each of my threshold columns. So I'm going to drop in 1 through 7 at the end, just so you can see each of these columns being leveraged. And now you might have an understanding of why we have all those columns out there. Okay, so we're going to leave it at that. Now, the last step with this, of course, if I'm doing an import, typically this import would be a lot more inclusive than what we see here now. I'm just trying to give you a flavor for how this all works. Last step is to make sure I save the file. Okay, so I've got a file called scorecard.csv that came out of the QuickScore system, and now I'm looking to introduce this back into QuickScore, but to a different organizational structure. Okay, so the question is, well, how do you go ahead and do that? And nicely up at the top here, I've already got a place where I need to handle that. Connect is already open in a second tab. Now, the way this works is whatever your URL for your system is, which will, let's say, stop off at .com, what I need to append on after that is a / followed by the value connect. And the rest of these string that you see up there automatically gets populated. Okay, so the main thing you just need to be aware of is putting the word connect at the end of your existing URL. Now, the next thing to be aware of is that to do a lot with this is dependent upon your credentials. Okay, so right now I am a power user in my own environment. My username is Frank Z. I've already taken the time to load in the password. Now, this user has got access to everything, all structures in my system, and that's really important. So if I was just some a viewer out there that might have had access to just a small percentage of my system, they might be able to access this location, but they might not be able to do much, okay? So I'm making sure that I'm logging in with a credentialed user that can do basically the extent of what I need to get through this session as. Okay, so I'll log in as Frank Z, I'll hit submit, and I'll get taken to a screen that looks like this. So the first thing that I need to do here is, if I'm working through imports, is click up at the top, there's an option called Create New Import. And what that's going to do is walk me through a nice little wizard where I can work my way through it. You see there's a number of steps to get through. There's actually 5 steps. In our training example, we're just going to cover the first 4 of these options here. And the first step is basic information. So I'll go ahead and click on that. I'll get presented with a dialog screen that looks like this. My first step is to define what this import name is going to be, something meaningful. And right now I'm going to be as meaningful as I can. Okay, so right now we're doing an import of the scorecard structure. I'll spell that out. Typically, of course, you would provide a different name because you might have a number of different scorecard structures that you're looking to bring in. Right now, I'll just keep that as generic as I can. Okay, next thing to note is that the data source is definitely coming from Excel. So I'm going to leave the default that we see here. The next one's really important. So the import type here, most of the time what you're doing is you're working with updating metric values. So usually what you need to do here is select update metric values. In this case, what I need to do to get through this one example is select create scorecard. All right, so easy to skip that step. Thankfully, I did not. Okay, so next thing is you'll see there's a couple more options at the bottom. There's an option called overwrite any existing files with the same name. I check that box without even thinking about it. Why do I do that? If I had tested this out before this webinar today, I might have had a file called scorecard.csv somewhere in my system, which I certainly do. So to avoid any problems with conflicts with that, I just check this box without really thinking about it. Okay, so the next thing I need to do here, or the last step, is click Browse. And what I need to do is grab the scorecard structure file, which happens to be called scorecard.csv. I'll click on it, and I'll click Open. And that's it. So at this point now, I can move on from this step here and click OK in the top right. Okay, the second step is a step called Source Data. I'll go ahead and click on that. Now, this step here is important in that what I need to do is take a look at the column mapping, where you'll see there right now every single column out there, and these are the columns coming from my Excel file. These are the mapping options within Connect. And what I want to look at is every single column being successfully mapped with a yellow tag? And the answer is, well, yes, nice job. And the reason for that is because I started this process as efficiently and smartly as I could have. Okay, so I used QuickScore to do the export. I'm now getting ready to import that file back into the system. So leveraging this technique here, I've got as good of a structure at this point as I can have to move on to the next step. So here I need to do absolutely nothing. So this looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click OK in the top right again. Third step is destination organizations here. And the question now is all right, so you've got this Excel file of all your structures in your environment, in your QuickScore or Scoreboard environment. Where do I want to drop this in? And you might have a lot of different things that are sitting out there. And where I want to drop this right now is under the webinar org parent. I've got another section called importing. And now you'll notice there's either blues or grays that are sitting out there. And what you'll notice is that to work through this process successfully, anything that's in blue is something that's got an existing scorecard built. And if you recall manual org example, I did that create scorecard step. I started building something. As soon as I built that one scorecard at the top level, I am essentially done with being able to import to it. Okay, so if I click on it, you'll notice that there's nothing happening down at the bottom here. Nothing's getting brought across. So that's a problem. And I would have had a problem if I didn't have, thankfully, something sitting in gray. So this is why I've got a second org at this point sitting out there called automated org example. I'll go ahead and click on that. And you'll notice now successfully down at the bottom, something has happened. Okay, so that's a good thing. So we're going to say, great, that's all I need to do. Make sure that when I click on something, it's in gray and that something's getting brought across in the bottom left. And that's all I need to do there. I'll click OK and move on to the last step. And that last step is called mapping. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And we'll see that this one, in this case, is as easy as it's going to get for me. I clicked on something in the prior step. I clicked on mapping, and you'll see that there's a yellow tag getting brought across to the organizational structure. So again here, if I see everything in yellow, I'm good to go. I'm just going to go ahead and click OK. And I'm purposely have an example coming up where that is not going to be the case. But for now, I'm good. I'll click OK. And I'm done with this step. So you'll see that everything is in blue here. And if I want to get out of the screen and successfully save this, in this case, the import of a scorecard structure, I'll click Save in the top right. Okay, so we're now ready to run this new import, and you might have a list of something that was already created out there. I want to make sure that I keen in on the one example that I just created. Notice that we'll have different icons for different things that you do. I want to make sure I've got something that's based on Excel right now, so this is the row I want to work with. Okay, any issues here? I could edit if I mess something up. If I want to get rid of this entirely after this webinar, let's say, and clean out my Connect environment, I could delete this row. But for now, what I want to do is certainly run this to make sure that this thing is working and behaving as I would expect it to. So I'll go ahead and click Run Now. All right, so this time around, all I'm going to do is take a look at the status column and see that that has lit up in green, and that is my clue that that is a good thing. Okay, so what you're going to see me doing a lot here when I'm working with Connect is I'll have one environment or one tab open for Connect, the original tab for my, in this case, QuickScore environment. And I'll go back there and you'll say, oh gosh, you just imported it and nothing happened. And the answer is, well, that's actually expected. So if I ever make a change here, my next step is to go up to the top left and click that reload this page option. And if I go ahead and click on that, you'll notice now something has happened. So I no longer get that blank scorecard structure. So basically what I've got now is the buildup that I walked you through before. So before I created a scorecard called Scorecard, I created a perspective called Financial. I created an objective called Increase Revenue. And then I took the time to create one measure called Training Revenue. Okay, so everything else that we see here, book revenue, customer, if I expand that out, these items here were all handcrafted by me in Excel. And I just leveraged that trick with the export to kind of help get this process going where I didn't have to guess and get a feel for what the different columns are that the product is looking for. Okay, so this is looking very good. So we move on to the next step. And that's going to be, well, let's maybe take a little bit more of an audit. So the structure looks good to me here. Now, if I click on book revenue and I click on edit, a couple things out here. Actually, let's click on customer satisfaction survey. That's the one I want to click on. Okay, so under this one now, for those last two rows in Excel, I took the time to do a couple different changes, if you recall. First thing that I did is I changed the data type from standard to %. And the label, whatever it was there in Excel, had to be exactly what it was. I think I called it percentage. And that has come across here successfully. So that's the first thing I'm auditing here. The next thing I'm auditing is the aggregation type. So the default on that one was sum. If you recall, I switched that to average. I had to make sure I typed that in correctly. Because I did, that value is coming across successfully. So that looks good. The other things I didn't change. So scoring type, calendar, I left those alone. What I did take the time was move my way to the right-hand columns, which were thresholds. And I worked my way to column Q or whatever it was there. I dropped in the first value, which was my lowest value, which was my red flag. I put in a 90. The next column over, I dropped in a 95. Okay, so this looks great to me. Everything is behaving the way I would expect. Next thing, let's audit quickly 3-color stabilize. So this one, there's a couple things where I had labeled it 3-color stabilized. I gave the name of the measure, which I said wasn't a normal thing for me to do. Because I had labeled that first of those 2 columns 3-color stabilized, that's why this is coming across that way. What is more important actually was that scoring type column, making sure I had the spelling and everything correct on that. And because I did, notice that the scoring type has now come across to match that value. Now, the other thing to note is that those threshold columns, I said this is the one example that has 7 different options out there, which is why we've got 7 thresholds. And I'll see that after I dropped in 1 through 7, purposely labeling them as such to see those values cascade across there, I see those values have been brought across successfully there. So this all looks good. And I'm going to say great job with the import of the scorecard structure. Obviously, I would have had maybe hundreds of measures that might have come across there. So I might have had a lot of things that I wanted to double check and audit on it. But for now, we're going to say everything's great. To get out of this editing mode again, I'm going to click done in the bottom left. Okay, so with that, we are done with the concept of importing a scorecard structure. And with that, we're going to move on to the next topic, which is importing measure values. Now, measure values can be imported in a few different ways. Believe it or not, I'm going to cover each of those as efficiently as I can here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to click on training revenue. In the first example, what I'm going to walk you through, just like I did with the scorecard structure, I walked you through it manually first, and then I walked you through how you go about importing it. Now, if you haven't worked through updating a measure within the system here, I'll just quickly show you that. You click on it, on the measure. Then within the system, if you've got permission to do this, and not everybody does, which is why I'm logged in as a power user in this case. There might have been other classes that I could have got into with this, but for now, great, I've logged in with a user that's got the rights that I need here. Now I'm just going to type in some values for the month of March. 225,000 is my actual value. My red flag is 200,000, and my goal is 220. Okay, so just by looking at these numbers here, because actual is greater than goal, this measure is going to light up in green once I click save. And that is looking good. Now that was painless, all right, took me 2 seconds to do that. If I was responsible for just this one measure, I could merely just keep leveraging this update technique, all right? But what if I was responsible for hundreds of measures out there across multiple years of time? Maybe I just started working with the system and I need to get data not just for March 2020, but maybe going back to 2019 and maybe even going back to 2018 and earlier than that. So the question is, well, how do you go about that most efficiently? And to do that, I'm going to pick on, again, up in the top right, there's that send to option. And this time, I'm going to leverage the measure value import file selection down at the very bottom there. All right, so unlike the last time, when I selected that scorecard structure, it immediately dumped out the file into Excel, and I was able to then select it and start manipulating the file. Well, this updates file works completely different. Okay, so what you'll see here is that I get presented with the option to select what organizational structure do I want to update in the Excel file. And what you'll see is that because I'm working with this automated org example structure to start this process, it's going to assume that's exactly what you want. And the good news is, yep, that is what I want. Okay, so if there was other things, just so you know, I could work with the structure on the left, click away within here and click add to introduce it on the right-hand side. I don't want to do that right now, so I'm just going to leave things alone and click next. So the next question is what periodicity do I want to bring across? Do I want to load 15 months of data? Do I want to bring across 3 months of data? I'll show you two different ways of working through this. Well, right now I just want to deal with 2020. So the first step that I'm going to do is work my way from January 1, 2020. So I'm picking the first day of the month here in my selection. And then for the end date, I'm just going to take it through March. And now I'll just show you an alternative to using the calendar. I can just go and type in the values directly here. So I'm going to drop in March 1st of 2020. And typically with this, what I'm doing is I'm putting the first day of a given month to represent that month's value there. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to have January, February, and March coming across there in my data set. Now, the next question is really important here as well, is you'll see that down at the bottom, I've got two different options as far as working with measure updates. The default is dates and columns. It says the words easier to update, and it is. I'll give you an example of that in a couple minutes. But first, I'm going to tackle on the more challenging one, where I'm going to wish to load in actual values and thresholds. So if both of those are true, this is the option that you need to select to be able to work through that. All right, so I'll click dates and rows, click next. And what we'll see here is that everything that's been populated within the automated org example for a given 3-month period that I've selected will come across at this point. So previously I had taken the time to populate the training revenue. You'll see that that value is sitting there. What you'll also notice is that if you've defined thresholds in that measure definition screen, and recall this is all coming, these values at the bottom are coming from Excel. When I did that before, customer satisfaction survey, I typed in a 90 and a 95 in that one row. And now what's happening periodically is those values are going to come across month by month. So that looks good. The last measure, that kind of bogus measure that I created called 3-color stabilize, exactly the same thing is true there. So my periodic values or thresholds of 1 through 7 are coming across. So this all looks great. I'm happy with this. How do I get out of here now? I click download import file. Again, I need to bump up the zoom so everybody can see this without squinting. All right, so I've done that. Again, I love highlighting that box there and expanding all so I can see everything that I'm working with. Now, on that previous scorecard structure example, remember I said that one's got a lot more columns to it? And in that previous, it was going all the way through column W. Now, this one, on the measure updates, I'm only going through column L. Great, less to deal with, less work to kind of work through this example. So that's the first thing to note. Now, the other thing to note is because I did in my selections there 3 months, I see January, February, March coming across for each measure. And I'm just going to work, let's focus in on training revenue up at the top there. Other things that are coming across is the org structure that I imported out. This cryptic ID column, all right, what is that all about? This is actually the most critical column in our system, all right? So we've got a unique identifier code for every single measure, believe it or not, in the system. And that's going to be true working your way up the scorecard structure, but for now we're just focusing in on the concept of measures. Now, why do we have unique identifiers? Well, you might have training revenue not sitting under just this one org. You might have it sitting in each of 100 different regions that are out there. So we need a unique way of representing training revenue. and that value happens to be this identification code. And I'll show you later how you can go ahead and determine that if you didn't nicely dump it out like I just showed you and have the product give you those values measure by measure there. Okay, so that's what that's all about. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do here, just kind of give you an example and work through this, is I'm going to take the value for training revenue for March. I'm going to copy that, including the thresholds, and just drop that into January and February. Okay, so a couple things with this to note is I'm assuming that my actuals were the same every month, which is certainly possible. Not likely, but we're going to accept that as is. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that the thresholds were not defined at the measure definition level for training revenue. And this might be your time to stop and say, was that a smart thing for me to do or not? And you might say, yeah, I have training revenue goals that are different in the summer versus the winter and things like that. So it might make sense for you to manually handcraft and hand type them in threshold for threshold month by month. In this case, for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy that and drop those into January and February. Okay, so with that, I am happy with what I've loaded in here. I'm just going to basically change 2 rows for 1 measure, and I'm going to importantly click Save at the top to make sure I save that. All right, next question. Where do I import this in? And it's going to be going back to Connect. All right, so I'll walk you through this. As we start going through this, you're going to see some of these things are repetitive. So I'll try to speak through these a little bit more quickly. Now, first step, create new import. Next step, basic information. What am I doing here? I nicely worked through this yesterday evening. So I've got all the names that I want already sitting out there. My name for this is going to be dates and rows. Okay, so that's going to be the name I want for this one. The data source is Excel. The import type, unlike the last time where I had to switch that to scorecard structure, I said the most of the time you're going to be dealing with updating metric values. Well, the good news is I don't need to do anything. That is exactly what I want. The box here at the end, I always check, made note of that before. And then I now need to click Browse to find the file. And the one that I'm going to bring across here is the automated org example value import file. And I'll click Open and click OK. All right, next I'll click Source Data and we'll take a look at this. Is everything mapped successfully? And you'll say, oh no, it is not. Okay, so if we take a look at this, unlike the scorecard structure, everything had a nice yellow color tag across the board. And the question now is this the fact that A and C, that they don't have a yellow tag, is that an issue? And you might say, no, in this case, no, it is not. Because, and the reason why is it not? The main thing as far as mapping these things up successfully, I already talked that through before, is that ID column. So as long as this one's got that mapped up correctly, I'm good to go right now. Now, I will mention that if you had multiple organizations, right now I've just got automated org example. What if I wanted to import this to Northeast, Southeast, Northwest? It's certainly possible to have multiple things populated in column A. If that was the case, I'll just quickly show you this here. What I would do is recommend mapping this to metric ID 1. And then what I would do is work my way up the top, right down the chain here, and populate all the columns out there if you wish. The main thing would have been introducing the organization. This measure match, really not that important because this ID column covers that. All right, if you like having everything in yellow, that's how you would go about it. Now, to undo that, there is no undo button. What I need to do is just drag and drop these things out of there and put this back to the way it looked when I first came into the screen. Okay, so either would have worked. I could have left it, that change that I just made there, or I could have certainly have left the default as well because I have one organization. Okay, so I'll click OK. I'm happy with that, and I'll move on to destination metrics. Same exact stuff we talked through before. Expand webinar, I'm dropping this into underneath importing. And where I'm going to put this is going to be automated org example. Now on the right, the question is, what do I want to bring across from Excel into my structure? Now, my answer to you is the only thing that I've changed really is the training revenue. So let's go back to Excel for a second here. Remember before, all I did was I populated values for February and January. It's the only change that I made. So technically, when I do this import, the only values that are going to be populating are those 2 months for that one measure. So I could just click training revenue at this point. Now, what if a week from now, a month from now, I'm actually going to be ready to populate book revenue and these other items at the bottom there? If that's the case, and for the sake of time, as far as having to go back and edit this particular item, what I can do right now is just click on scorecard at the top here, and you'll see what it's going to do is it's going to drop all the measures for that structure that I've clicked on. And I could have just clicked on financial, just clicked on the objective. Whatever I click on, it's going to bring across all the measures underneath that level. Okay, so for now, I'm going to say, yeah, go ahead and bring all those 4 measures across, click OK, and move on to the next step. All right, so the last step is mapping. And what we'll see here is that that measure file had 4 measures. I've told it to go ahead and bring across in that last selection all 4 measures. So the question is, are everything coming across in yellow? Perfect. Hit OK and click Save in the top right to successfully save this new item called Dates and Rows. All right, so what I'm going to do now is run it. And again, I'll click Run Now. And I purposely made sure that the status, giving an example of this, say, oh no, what is going on? Why isn't this saying the word success? And I'll just click on this and I'll show you why it's giving us this. When I click on that item, it says measure ID 4722, whatever that is, did not have any source data found for it. All right, so if I go back to Excel, what does that mean? It says, okay, here's the ID 4722. I took the time to bring that across in my selection options. I did choose to bring across book revenue. The problem that the product is flagging right now is the fact that I didn't at least have one entry for a actual or at least one entry for a threshold. All right, so the product is saying basically you're going to be importing nothing for book revenue, and that's okay at this point. So I'm happy with this. I'll go back to connect and I'll click OK to get out of that screen there. Now, what's a good thing to do at this point is go into QuickScore or Scoreboard and see, did I successfully import any data? And again, what do I need to do here is click refresh, and I'll see that I have successfully at this point brought across an import for January, February, and March. And those values are 225,000 there. So that looks great. All right. So we're done with dates and rows. Now we're going to bring across the other option that I showed you before, which is called dates and columns. Now to illustrate this, what I'm going to do is just, before I do that, I'll pick on customer satisfaction survey within the system here. And you'll see that what we're doing now is dates and columns. And if you recall before, it said the words easier to update. And where this is going to be okay in this example is because for customer satisfaction survey, I've already got thresholds loaded. All right, so let's assume with this, I only need to deal with the uploading of values for customer satisfaction survey, which already is going to have thresholds coming across 90 and 95 month by month. So with that being the case here, and of course I could have all done this in one file, I'm just walking you through option by option here for this webinar. I'm going to go back to that option under Send To, that measure value import file. I'm happy with the automated org example. I'll click next. I have to deal with what my date range is. Again, whatever your preference is here, I'm going to go January 1 here, and maybe again, you like that technique with this dropping in the date value on the right. So I'm happy with January through March. This time, as opposed to last, I'm going to leave the default of dates and columns here. And I'll click next. Now, what we'll see with this is, again, a preview of what's coming across. Now, what we're also noticing here is that, oh, this is a nice, more simplistic looking file, all right? So what I'm getting here is just one row for each measure. And I'll click Download Import File, wait for that to come across, bump up my zoom so everybody can read it, and again, expand out my columns here. Okay, so the only thing I'm going to do differently with this is one notice is that yes, I do have one row for each measure. What is different now is that as opposed to having a row for each month, I'm now getting a column for each month. So you'll see why this is only going to work is because I've only got one value, actuals, that I'm going to be loading in this particular example here. Okay, so with that said, again, for the sake of time, I'm just going to load in one measure. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to be loading in the value of 95 January through March for customer satisfaction. I'm leaving these two rows blank, and I'll again highlight that, stress that for a second, and I'll click save to make sure I get that saved successfully. Okay, where do I import this? This goes into Connect. I'm going to go back there. Again, try to work through as I'm running short on time here quickly. Create new import, basic information. Nicely already have the option name that I need, dates and columns. What am I doing? I'm updating metric, leave that alone, check the box, browse to the file. Gets a little bit more tricky when you're doing what I'm doing right now, importing the same file different ways multiple times. What I need to do is just make sure I grab the latest version of that. It happens to append the value of 1 on the end of it. I'll click open, I'll click OK. All right, next option, source data. And we'll go ahead and click on that. Okay, now this one, unfortunately, we're going to notice that most of the columns have not been mapped. That's not good. Okay, now maybe I say that's not such a big deal. Let's just hit OK and hopefully it'll work. And we'll say, no, it's not going to work. So if we click OK there, you'll see that up at the top, I'm getting this nasty looking red message saying, sorry, you need to do something different to get this to go through successfully. And the good news is, and again, I'm running short on time here, but I'm just going to need to select the option called use a date header row for imports. And you'll notice that there's this nice little yellow or orange, whatever color that is there, that's getting highlighted for this entire section there. And believe it or not, that is the only change I need to worry about. Now, this exact same topic we had before with the metric ID. Do I need to map up all columns A and C? You may need to if you're dealing with multiple organizations there. But for now, I've just got the one org called automated org example. So I'll click OK. Hopefully I don't get any red messages. I did not, that's good. I'll click destination metrics. Again, work my way down to webinar importing. And I'm gonna pick on automated org example. Now, the only thing that I've taken the time to populate again is customer satisfaction survey. I could just select that one item. Again, I'll assume that eventually I'm going to have more metrics that I'm ready to load. I'll click scorecard, bring all those items in down at the bottom and click OK. I'll select mapping and I'm going to throw you a curveball on this one, and I'll notice that this one I'm only getting 2 of the 4 items getting mapped when I'm doing this particular option here. Okay, what is the reason for that? Well, this is just a change in behavior where if I go back to these 2 rows, I've got no actuals that have been populated for them. The product's saying, hey, you're not gonna have a problem here shortly because there's nothing gonna happen for those 2. So just a little different tweak on the different screens that we've been looking at there. So that's actually gonna be okay. So I just wanna make sure that customer satisfaction gets some values here. So I'll click okay, click save. I'll click run now for dates and columns. Thankfully, this has turned green. Now, one thing I do want to show you with this is that if you click on things, there's a lot of little goodies out there. If I clicked on dates and columns, you'll see what has happened. I've brought across 3 months load for one measure and a second measure. The only one that really matters right now is the customer satisfaction. So that's the one that I just handcrafted. I'll click OK. I'll go back to QuickScore, click refresh. Make sure that customer satisfaction now has values for January through March, which it does. The other thing that I want to do is just notice that even though I didn't do anything with training revenue, did anything get harmed on that one? And the answer is no, that got left alone. Now, if I had gone in and wiped out those values, maybe I slipped and changed the value, I deleted a value, well, that would have blanked out. If I deleted that cell here for January, it might have wiped out January's value here in QuickScore. All right, so be very careful with changes that you're making because it could have a significant impact all the way through to the import here in the product. All right, so that looks good. Now, let's go to our third and final way of importing measure updates. So, and I jumped ahead here by clicking home, so let me go back. And what I'm going to do here is introduce an update for book revenue. All right, so we'll click on book revenue here and we'll see that, yeah, you've got nothing populated for book revenue. Now, what I'm going to do differently here is show you where to get to the cryptic measure ID. And that's all the way up at the top right here. There's an option I. If you hover over it, it says info. I'll click on that. And what I'm looking for is, what is that ID there? It's 4722. I am writing that thing down. Just make sure that I don't mess this up during this webinar. So I've got 4722. I've got that jotted down. I'm now ready to click close and say, okay, how's that third way that you go about potentially of updating a metric? And to do that, what I'm going to do is click on home. That'll take me back to the main screen. Beneath that, again, I've got rights to do this as a power user. I've got an option called measure updates. I could load in values here manually. What I'm focused in right now is importing. So right at the top there is an option called import measure values. And I'll go ahead and click that. If this is the first time that you've ever seen this option, what you want to do at this point is, you'll see that up at the top here, there's an option that says, hey, we've got a nice little example format. If you don't have one ready to go, well, go ahead and click on it and we'll provide a file for you. Notice how I'm leaving the screen exactly where it is. What I'm going to do is go and open that file. Again, bump it up to something that I can read. Maybe expand this a little bit here, just move it up to the top. So that takes visual preference here. Now, what I'm going to do again quickly here is, you'll see that there's a defaulting bunch of stuff, bunch of junk in there. What I'm going to do is delete rows 3 through 6, get rid of those, and I'm just going to type over row 2. So I'm just leaving that stuff there as an example. Putting in the metric ID for book revenue, that was 4722 if I type that in correctly there from my notes from before. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is type in a value. And my book revenue value is going to be 75,000, not for 2005. It's going to be for March of 2020. I don't have any notes, so I'm not going to worry about notes. What is my red flag? 50,000. My goal is 70,000, and I've got that typed in there. Now, a couple things to note here is that these columns are movable. Some people like having the actual right next to the thresholds. I could have moved this before column E if I wanted to, or of course I could just leave it exactly like it is, and for the sake of time, I am. Now, the other thing that I've got to do here is be careful with the date formatting when I'm working with this last measure update option. You'll see that what the product is looking for is a 4-digit year. If you do not have a 4-digit year, you might see things not coming across the way that you would expect, all right? So be careful with that. Now, to do that, what I'm gonna do is, actually, let me just drop in one more. I don't wanna paste that, I wanna do a copy. Just want to have a second entry out there just to show you the fact that, hey, I could load in multiple values here, 70,000 going back to February. Okay, so I've got 2 entries now that I'm loading. I could have loaded January and so on there. Now, what I want to do here is make sure I format this column here. So what I'm going to do is right click, format cells, wait for that to propagate. There's an option called custom. Halfway down, there's an option called MDYYY. Once I type it in, I can go in up at the top there and customize that and click OK. Make sure this has got a 4-digit year on it, and I'm good to go. Now, what I'm working with right now is a CSV file. If you've worked with CSV files, you know that date formatting is a royal pain, okay? So typically what I do is get myself out of CSV mode by, well, like nicely up at the top here, there's an option called Save As. So I'm gonna click on that. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the file format to XLSX. I can leave the defaulting name as I wanted to. Right now, I'm just gonna call this measure updates so it matches perfectly with the option that I'm doing, and click save. All right, so I've got this file ready to go. How do I bring that across? I'm gonna go back to QuickScore. And notice I didn't leave the screen at all. I'm just gonna go ahead and click Browse, find that file, measure updates, click Open, click Import, and it creates invalid data. Please correct your spreadsheet. Let me see if I can figure this out quickly. And yep, got to delete stuff. So that's the problem. You can't leave the instructions there. Sorry, I'm scrambling here with time. Save that. Let's try this again. And let me cancel that and try that one more time. There we go. Sorry about that. Import, click done. Am I done with this? No, I'm going to immediately check this out. So under scorecard, book revenue, did they successfully bring across a value for February, 75,000? I mean, March. And if I go back to the prior month, I did successfully bring in a second row. I did not take the time to populate a third, but I have successfully brought that across, thankfully, after I cleaned up and removed instructions. Okay, so lastly, with importing here, I'm going to give you one more example here. We're going to clear our minds from the measure world and go to initiatives. So I'm going to click underneath foundation. There's an option called initiatives. And the first thing I'm going to do is, again, walk you through what's called a status update. If you haven't seen this at all, I apologize, but we'll walk you through this example out here. Within initiatives, I'm going to first walk you through how do you manually load in a status update for a task or an initiative. And what I'm going to do is just going to click on Add Status Update. You'll see that there's a couple simple options that I need to do. You can pick a time of the update, which is going to be April 15th. And the question is, how much of this task is complete? I'm going to say 50%. And how much of the budget has been spent? 2,500. And that's it. I click Add, and I have now successfully populated a status update. And the question is, well, what if you've got 50, 100 of those updates you need to get through? Can I potentially import status updates? And the answer is yes, I can do that. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any export options from within the system to get you a formatted file. So that's my first caveat to you. The other thing I'm going to note is, notice I'm going to import this to automated task example. You'll see that there's nothing as far as a status update sitting out there currently. So I'm going to go back into my system here, and I've got a file already crafted. The good news is it is a pretty simplistic file. This will be recorded so you can lean back on it just to see what those columns are. ID, date, note, percent complete, and budget spent to date. That is it. You've got to make sure you've got a valid ID for where you're going to be importing this to. And that, again, is going to be that I example that I showed you with metrics. Hopefully I've got that typed in for the right org at this point. 18023, I've got my date, I've got my percent complete, budget, all the stuff that I just showed you is sitting out there. Now the question is, all right, I've got the file ready to go. Where do I import it? It's going to be in Connect, create new import, basic information. This time I'm going to be doing an initiative status update. So this one I need to be careful of again. Most of the time you're doing this. This time I'm doing the update initiative status. Check the box, browse, find the right file, initiative status update, click open, click OK, source data. This is all matching perfectly, hit OK. Destination initiatives, where do I want this to go? This time I'm going to pick on just the one initiative. So I'm giving you different flavors for how you can play this. So if I've got just one item that I'm importing to, you could just pick that one item. Click OK, click mapping, should be a one-to-one match. Looks great, hit OK, save, run that item. Go back to QuickScore, click refresh, notice nothing here. And thankfully I click refresh and I now have an update for April 15th, 50%, $2,500 there. Okay, so I scrambled through that one. Now I'm gonna pause for a second because we're at the top of the hour here. And I promised 1 hour and I was afraid I was gonna spill over, and we are. So if you need to drop off, I completely understand. I've got one more topic that I need to cover, which is going to be database connections, and it's going to take me a few minutes to do that. This will be recorded, so if you need to get back to us with the recording, please keep an eye out for that. Okay, so with that said here, let's move on to this last topic of database updates. Now with this one is we're done with Excel, so we're We're scrapping that idea of Excel and we say, hey, we've got some wonderful database out there with a bunch of tables and things that I might be able to import directly into QuickScore or Scoreboard too. All right, so with that said, there's a couple things here, is that back under Connect, you'll notice that the first step with this, for the first time, we're going to leverage an option called Create New Data Source. And I'll click on that and you'll notice, and I'm just going to show you a couple things here, is that there is the ability to import from DB2, Oracle, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, SOAP, and then FTP, SFTP down at the bottom there. Now, what I'm going to focus in on is MySQL. And I'll just give you a look for how this would come across here by clicking on it and clicking on Next. And you'll see within here, there is a number of entries that I need to populate. All right, so I need to put in a valid database port, a valid database. I can give whatever description I want, a valid user and password to connect to the database. And there's the database name down at the bottom there, okay? So for the sake of time, I'm not gonna type all that stuff in, thankfully, okay? So we'll click cancel, and I'm just gonna show you what that would look like when I took the time to set this up previously. And I'll click on an existing data source coming from MySQL. I'm just going to click on edit to show you what that looks like here. Okay, so that's the exact same screen I just showed you with fields coming across. This is where I could edit, clean things up. The only thing that I cannot see visually is the password that comes across encrypted. Let's just assume that what I've got out there, whatever that password is, all that is wonderful. And I'll click, of course, this would need to be updated for whatever is correct for your environment, all right? So right now, this is a sample database that I'm connecting to that happens to be MySQL. So again, I'll click cancel to get out of there. Now, the last step is creating an import against that connection. And I'll walk you through, I already have this built here, but I'll walk you through step by step here. So up at the top, there's an option called Create New Import. Same thing that we worked with before, basic information. Now, what's different is what I'm looking to do is grab that connection, and this is where calling it something different than MySQL would have been helpful there. But for now, again, I'm just keeping this as generic as I can. What I'm going to call is the name of this is going to be database import. Call this whatever makes sense as far as your connection. So this is the last thing that we're importing. Is it going to be a database import? We'll click OK there. So that is somewhat similar to what we've been doing. Now, if we click on source data here, this is completely different than anything that I've shown you. So remember before with source data, we were seeing all those yellow tags coming across. We're making sure all the yellow was matching. In some cases, they did not. Well, when you're connecting to a database, none of that's there, okay? So the only thing that you've got is hopefully typing in SQL correctly. And what I'm doing is I'm doing a select star from social sentiment. Now, there's a lot of things that we're assuming here. In our example here to this database, we happen to have a table sitting out there, or a view, whatever that is formatted in such a way that is perfect for what my import needs to look like. All right, so a couple things is getting the SQL correct, and more importantly, having a table or a view ready to go so that when I click run query, I happen to have a beautifully formatted result set, which is certainly not going to be the case out of the box, typically in most environments out there. Okay, so let me just throw that out there as an important caveat. There might be, a bit of work that you need to do to get yourself to a result set that looks like this. Now, the fact that I do is great. Now I'm going to try to scramble and finish this off quickly here. Is what I need to do, you'll notice that there's nothing in yellow. All right, so I need to do a complete match here. I'm going to match up metric ID name to this first column, which happens to be each of my measure names. Date to date, simple enough, and then the actual value to the value column at the end there. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you with this is that I've got one measure for Facebook measure, Google search is a second, Twitter third, and then article mentions is a fourth measure type. And again, I've got one entry month by month going January 2018 through August 2019. So that's what we've got, and I'm going to finish this off by clicking OK. Clicking destination metrics, this step is exactly the same as what we've been working with. This time I'm going to pick on a different org called MySQL. And what I'm going to do is bring across just those 4 measures that match up to what's coming out of my database. So I'm going to click on Improve Brand Awareness. I've got just those 4 measures. I click OK. And then the last step is to do a mapping. This should be a 1-to-1 with 4 measures. Everything's in yellow, looks wonderful. Click OK, click Save, and run it. Make sure nothing is in red or yellow. Green is perfect. And I'll just give you a quick visual for what that looks like here. I've got to go to a different org, MySQL. Here are those 4 measures. What I'm hoping to see is values going through at least August 2019. Of course, I might have other months that I need to get in there at this point, but for now, this is behaving the way that I expect it to. All right, that was a lot. Hopefully you got through that all right. Let me go back to our PowerPoint that we started this all with. Pull up this screen again. Okay, so that concludes today's webinar. Hopefully you found that informative. A recording of the session will be made available later this week at some point. And with that said, we hope to see you at our next session, which will be next Thursday, April 30th. It will be led by Tom Keating, and he will be covering the topic of dashboards. So thanks for coming. Apologies that we ran over, and I hope to see you all again next week. Take care.